All right, so this is going to be the Bitcoin question and answer panel. This is going to be AKA the Bitcoin FUD panel. FUD it's really a terrible name. It's just not true. It's like people just have questions. That's not FUD, but FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
They're things that cause
fear.
Cause
fear. That makes sense, man. See, I didn't know that, Mark. Mark's teaching us here today. We're learning. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. You guys know Mark, but everybody else you do not know. So, I guess Paul too. But we're going to give everybody another chance. Tell everybody who you are and where you work, what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Nico Moran. I am the creator and host of Simply Bitcoin, and I'm also the director of content strategy at Swan Bitcoin.
Hi, I'm Bitcoin Mechanic. I've been in Bitcoin since around 2011. And my contention generally is that you can invent the perfect technology, but it doesn't help if no one uses it correctly. So I work for a company called Start9, and we make a personal server which is designed to make it easy for everyday people to run real servers in their home. So that means Bitcoin nodes, Lightning nodes, cloud storage, password management, things like that. Because if we don't use these things in that way, then the technologies are of limited use to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm Mark Moss. I create a lot of content on the Mark Moss Show and the Market Disruptors channels, nationally syndicated radio host, podcast host, and YouTube. A couple different shows there. Creating Bitcoin-focused content, macro, geopolitical content, specifically liking to attack problems and then bringing back to the solution being Bitcoin. So I am positioned to answer some of these FUD questions.
I'm Paul. I just started a company with my friends called Mutiny Wallet, and like what you were saying, if we don't use Bitcoin correctly, what's the point? And so it's a self-custodial Lightning wallet.
Man, so many things I love going on in this stage right now. I am a customer. I'm not a customer of Mutiny yet, although hopefully soon. I am a customer of Swan. I am a customer of Start9. How many more do you have out there? How many more embassies?
I have -1 because I've already started selling things that we're going to have to ship.
All right, that's awesome.
We had the genius idea of only bringing 3 of our products, and they sold out in 15 minutes. So
sorry, Kiara. We really do think you're a genius. This is, at least I do. I don't know, but yeah, no. So they basically, that product is fantastic. It's worth it even just for the password manager itself. So if you haven't checked out the the Start9 table, please go check them out. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to barrage you guys with a bunch of different questions about Bitcoin that are asked all the time. So I'm going to start out with, I'm just going to leave this open for whoever wants to answer it. Bitcoin wastes energy.
That's BS. Okay, so first you kind of have to break down why they say that, right?
Okay.
There's a lot more nuance. Yes, Bitcoin uses a lot of energy.
Okay.
But the question that's not asked is what energy is Bitcoin using?
Okay.
Right? So electricity, if you transport it over a long distance, it loses efficiency. You can't store it in a really effective manner. Battery technology isn't quite there yet.
Sure.
So you have to use it right then and there.
Yep.
So what tends to happen is that there's these isolated energy pockets where, before Bitcoin existed, that energy would go to waste, right? For the first time in human history, those isolated energy pockets, now they have monetary value, right? So Bitcoin miners are like water. They're going to go towards the cheapest electricity sources. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't cheap, it would not be economical for those miners to go there, right? So this whole narrative where it's Bitcoin uses more electricity in the country of Denmark. Okay, fine. But what electricity is it using?
Yeah.
And that electricity would have gone to waste if Bitcoin didn't come in there and use it. And then what are the unintended consequences of Bitcoin giving that wasted energy value?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, if you're in a very isolated community, you have no economical opportunities. All of a sudden, Bitcoin miners could come in there and develop the area. And you know what I'm the most excited for is what's going on in Africa. And that's why Jack Dorsey, I think he recently invested $2 million into a company there. There's all these isolated energy pockets all around the world that would normally not have any value, that for the first time have value. And we saw this in the Kingdom of Bhutan, they didn't want to advertise it publicly.
Yep.
And it just came out that they're investing $500 million because they have a tremendous amount of hydroelectric capacity.
Yep.
But what else are they going to do with all that energy? They're going to mine Bitcoin with it. And this phenomenon is happening on a worldwide level.
Yep.
And that's one of the things I'm the most excited for the next 5-10 years.
And so like, give an example of, you know, what's energy? I mean, I've never thought about energy anything before I got into Bitcoin. So what's an example of energy that would just be wasted?
So like the one that I would say is the easiest example is flared gas.
Okay.
Right. So
what's flared gas?
So flared gas, they mine or they extract natural gas, and that natural gas is very isolated, right? So it's not very economical to store it. You can't really use it. So what do? They literally set it on fire and they vent it onto the atmosphere.
Yeah.
For the first time, you can actually turn that into sweet, sweet Satoshis.
Yeah. So, and how does that work? What do they do?
I am not an engineer. I'm a content creator.
So it's not when they're mining for natural gas. It's when they're drilling for oil. So the natural gas comes out of the ground as a byproduct. So what they want is the oil, but the natural gas comes out of the well at the same time, but they're not equipped to handle it. Most in the United States, because the price of natural gas is so cheap that it's not economical to even capture the natural gas. So they just either vent it, which means let it escape into the ecosystem, or they'll flare it, meaning that they'll burn it. The other types, so that's a good example. So they're getting the oil, the natural gas goes out. How would they do that? Well, they capture the natural gas. So we use natural gas for lots of things, how to heat our homes, run our stove, dryer, etc. And so basically, one of the ways you could do it is take a gas turbine, like a generator, right? And it would hook into the gas directly and then create electricity right there. You can take a container, set it up with miners, set it at the wellhead, hook it into the turbine, create electricity right on spot, and then using an internet, they can just send the sats right up into space, right? So
you're enabled. Bitcoin miners enable you to take energy from where it is and meet it where it's at, where it's being wasted. It's too far to move it efficiently, and allows people who live in those places to turn it into a revenue source. That's basically
yeah, I mean, as opposed to going into the the environment, they can turn it into Bitcoin. I would also I would go back to that question and say, well, if someone were to say that, like, hey, I heard it wastes energy. What's a waste?
Yeah.
Right. So you waste time staring into space or sitting there with your eyes closed. You're wasting time. But that may be meditation for you, and that might be actually what keeps you sane. So I think it's a waste of time, but to you, it's useful. So we have to kind of understand what that is. But I think the best definition of waste would be if I create something, if I made dinner and then no one ate it and it had to get thrown away, then maybe I wasted it. I could have saved it and eat it another time. So to Nico's point, that energy, that gas is coming out of the ground, but now it's not being captured, it's being wasted. But also, Bitcoin doesn't compete. It can only run on the lowest price energy. Now, in California, we have the highest energy in the nation. We pay up to 40 cents per kilowatt hour in the summertime, 40 cents. But Bitcoin needs about 3 cents. So if it's 40 cents in California, why would someone be selling it for 3 cents? Oh, because they're creating more than they're selling, meaning there's leftover or wasted energy. That's what Bitcoin attacks. Bitcoin takes that wasted energy. It can't compete in California at 40 cents. It only goes to 3 cents. If enough people build up in that area and there's more demand for that energy and the prices increase to 5, 6, 7 cents, then Bitcoin packs up and moves to the next place with the cheap wasted energy.
Got it. So there's a real sense, and Bitcoin is a good steward. Bitcoin keeps energy from being wasted and turns it into a valuable resource for the people who can use it. Go ahead.
Exactly. This is what's so tragic about this way of framing it, because if we take these people at their word and we say that Bitcoin is, what is your concern here with the consumption of energy? These people usually are of the opinion that producing electricity damages the environment and that we need to produce it in a clean manner. And I'm saying, okay, I'm going to ignore the fact that you're reading nonsense and you haven't really done any research, but I'm going to take you at your word and assume that you really just want to transition into producing energy in a green way. Not that you're advocating we just stop consuming energy altogether, which is what a lot of them actually are pushing for, which is just destruction of society. But we'll say, okay, we want to transition to a green world. How do you do it? The if you could possibly come up with a solution that was more perfect than Bitcoin, I would love to see it. Because there are two options for transitioning to green energy. One is horrific government crackdowns on anything that doesn't comply with, clean, green agendas. And the other is through the market and through monetizing it. And humans don't go to places naturally where there's just abundant energy. That's not where cities naturally formed. They formed around coastlines and where rivers are so boats can get in and all that stuff. And then we transport the energy to where they are. If you own a house, I doubt your decision on where you bought your house was how is the energy produced in that city and how much does it cost per kilowatt hour. That's not why people live in the places they live. So we're transporting energy, which makes it completely inefficient. So Bitcoin, for the first time, says there's a bunch of energy in the middle of nowhere, and we're going to create an incentive for you, like on the side of a volcano in El Salvador. No one wants to live there, but we've created an economic incentive for you to go and actually develop energy-producing infrastructure here where you get paid to do it, and the town and the people will follow. And then you bootstrap things that way, and that is actually how you transition into this society that these people actually claim to want. Bitcoin is the solution for this. I'm not saying Bitcoin fixes everything, but it actually does fix this. So that's why it's such a tragic way to frame it. I'm saying if your concerns are legitimate, you couldn't ask for a bigger gift than Bitcoin. Thank God for Bitcoin.
Hey, now we're talking. Man, see, I told them anytime they use the phrase, we get them extra $50. So it's just, you're going to hear it a lot. Okay, so can one of you guys, this will be our last energy-related question because we don't like this question, but like what is the relationship, you mentioned it, one of you guys mentioned it, what is the relationship between energy usage and the human flourishing?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a direct correlation, and I've seen some on Mark's show. There's a direct correlation between how much humanity is able to harness energy and how much prosperity humanity is able to achieve. And to go back to what he was saying, I think the proponents against this, I genuinely believe, like, if you take at what they're saying at face value, I don't think they're being sincere.
Yeah.
I think what they truly want is they want to be able to dictate what energy use is okay and what energy use is not okay. Yeah. And I don't think that they have a defensible position politically and socially. Yeah. And it really falls down to Bitcoiners and people that are willing to speak the truth and to use their platforms to really expose their hypocrisy. And a buddy of mine, Walker, whose wife is Carla from the Crypto Couple, they did a great piece about the New York Times, right? Yeah. Stop the presses. So again, it's about exposing the hypocrisy. Because it's like, yes, electric cars, good to go. Yeah. Toasters, good to go. Video games, good to go. Bitcoin miners, that's bad. Dryers. and that's not a coincidence. Yeah. The reason that they're so hell-bent on this is because Bitcoin is a threat to their privilege. And what is that privilege? The privilege is that there's a bureaucratic elite that have the capability of being able to create money for free that everyone else has to work for, and they'll do whatever it takes. Naim Bukele wrote a piece about this for Bitcoin Magazine, Don't Drink the Elite's Kool-Aid, and in it he says they control the presses.
Who's Naim Bukele?
Naim Bukele is the president of El Salvador, right? Yeah. And he said it perfectly. He's like, they control the presses, they control the military, they control the credit agencies, but their most important control is their control on the truth, on the control of the narrative, right? Yep. So I think it's the job for Bitcoiners and for anybody who's on the side of freedom and human prosperity to just expose the hypocrisy, throw it back at them. So it's like, okay, so electric cars good, Bitcoin miners bad?
Yeah, electric cars using the same energy that's coming from all these sources that Bitcoin is using, yeah.
There's one technical point as well, just to take it more pedantically. Some of these people are saying Bitcoin can continue to do everything, it just doesn't need to use the proof of work algorithm, and they're saying it can carry on doing the same thing just with a proof of stake algorithm. And this is, what that translates to is basically they're saying we want a system of authority where what's true or not can be dictated by who's in power rather than who is consuming energy. And this is, is a non-starter, basically. The reason Bitcoin works and stays honest is because the only way you can change and rewrite history is if you are able to overpower the entire network in terms of energy rather than in terms of power. So that means consume more energy. If you want to change the last block of Bitcoin, okay, I hope you have a few megawatts of electricity at your disposal and all of these miners, because you cannot fake consumption of energy. It cannot be faked. Everything else can be faked. That's why you can, you know, invest in GameStop, and then the brokerage can say, actually, you didn't. Sorry. Like, that doesn't work in Bitcoin, because that's not actual real work. That's just authority, right? So that's why it's a non-start.
Yeah, it's not how the world works,
And they could fork it, too. Like, they're perfectly entitled to just fork it.
What does fork mean?
So they could start their own chain, proof of stake chain, you know, whatever you want to call it. Proof of, I can't curse, you know, thank God for Bitcoin, but you guys know what the S word that I'm thinking of is. They could fork it. They could totally fork it. In fact, there's been other versions of Bitcoin that have tried to fork it and have tried to change the protocol. But that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to coerce everybody to use their own version of the chain, because that's the version of the chain they can control easier.
I don't think so. I don't think they're real about making an alternative version. I think they just want to spread FUD. I think they just want to give Bitcoin a bad reputation, because we've said, where's the code? And the fork actually exists. It was done, proof of stake Bitcoin was done. There's a GitHub repo from it from like 6 years ago. And you all should support this, because if you own Bitcoin and someone forks it with a coin version of it, you just get free money. So support it. They won't win. And
See, they don't want it. They're just trying to throw shade on Bitcoin or spread FUD.
There we go. Okay. Appreciate you
energy.
guys. All right, now we're going to move on to, I'm sure you guys have never heard this before, okay? Bitcoin is a Ponzi, or Bitcoin is a pyramid scheme. Very, very rare. This never comes up, you know?
I'll jump on this one. I've done some talks on this before. You know, what is a Ponzi scheme, first of all? So we kind of lose definition of words at some point. And so a Ponzi scheme, as was created by Ponzi himself, is a system where you constantly have to put money in, and the new money in goes to the original people getting money out. Now, a Ponzi scheme has been identified by the SEC as something dangerous, and they need to safeguard consumers from getting into these Ponzi schemes. And typically they say, one, they're highly complex, and so nobody can really tell exactly how they work. That's one. Two, they make a big, bold claim about some big return that you could potentially make, right? Well, Bitcoin is neither of those. So Bitcoin is not complex. It's actually pretty simple. It's open. It's transparent. It's basic math. You can figure out how it works. It's got a fixed supply. Two, there is no promoter. So there is nobody telling you that you can make a big return. So it doesn't fit the SEC's definition of a Ponzi. I think why most people consider a Ponzi, which maybe look at the fiat money system that's so complex nobody can understand it, and you have a promoter telling you to use it. But never mind that. The reason why they call it a Ponzi is because what they see is that if people don't continue buying it and putting money in, then the value, the US dollar valuation of the Ponzi or of the Bitcoin, would drop. But that's a failure to understand what value is or how value is created. See, there's no such thing as intrinsic value. All value is subjective. And so if Bitcoin is a Ponzi, then so is gold, so is Tesla stock, and so is everything else that we create value for, or we give valuation to. So just like gold, if nobody thought gold was valuable anymore for some reason, then gold would go to zero. We don't need gold, so it goes to zero. And same with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has that valuation. That's why they call it a Ponzi scheme. It's not the definition of a Ponzi. It fails to misunderstand both what a Ponzi is as well as value creation is. So that's the answer.
All right. This is similar. I feel like this is part of the reason the Ponzi word gets thrown around. Bitcoin is too volatile.
Yeah, I mean, so you have two options right now, right? Which is, you know, if you want to use a quote-unquote currency, you have a currency that is literally designed to go down and to the right forever, which is quote-unquote relatively stable if you have the financial privilege of living in a country that has a relatively stable fiat currency. The vast majority of the world do not have that privilege. Right, so if you talk to an Argentine, Bitcoin is making all-time highs in the Argentine currency, right? And actually, if you look at the adoption rate of Bitcoin in those countries, it's like 27 to 20%, and it keeps going higher and higher and higher. So I completely forgot your question.
Bitcoin's
Too volatile.
too volatile.
Yeah, too volatile. Okay. So now let's take a look at Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin goes up into the right. So yes, the short-term volatility, as it transitions from a store of value, which I think we're in that phase right now, and it transitions into a medium of exchange. Bitcoin's at $1 sat parity, right? The volatility is definitely going to be a lot lower at that point. So it's like where are you in the world, right? Because if you're in Argentina, or if you're in Turkey, or if you're in Venezuela, volatile to what? Argentina is dealing with 104% inflation, right? Bitcoin is salvation there, right? If you live in the West, and you're dealing with supposedly the 6% inflation or 5% inflation, then yeah, maybe it is too volatile. But I think over time, that narrative, because that's one of the strongest narratives that the central bankers are using, I think it's going to fall flat on its feet. And I think both Nayib Bukele on the nation state level and Michael Saylor on the public company level are going to be vindicated next cycle, and there's no amount of media FUD or misrepresentations that they throw at them will stick. And I think that other countries, because of market forces, are not going to have a choice but to look at something like Bitcoin as an alternative to holding fiat currencies on their balance sheets or on their treasuries.
Let me add on to that volatility piece as well. So a couple things I would say. So I started my career as a real estate investor. And yes, I still own real estate. I know it's a shame to talk about that at a Bitcoin conference, but
off the stage, sir. Excuse me.
Yeah, I gotta leave now. But typically, they would talk about in the real estate cycle. There's business cycles, there's real estate cycles, there's lots of different cycles, and so typically there's like a 5-year real estate cycle. So I'd say, don't buy this house unless you plan to hold for at least 5 years, because we know it moves in cycles. There's a 7-year business cycle, et cetera. And so if you look at Bitcoin in a similar way, there's never been a 3-year period when it's been down. So you could have bought at the peak of 2017, peak of 2021, and you haven't had to wait 3 years to get back. So if you kind of approach it from that angle, now volatile to what? Volatile to be used against the US dollar? Well, that's not really where it's at. Nico kind of pointed out this evolutionary process that we're in. And so you have to realize that we're in an evolutionary process, and we went from a collectible, we're probably now in the store of value stage. Potentially, we could get to a medium of exchange, and then maybe we'll get to a unit of account at some point. It could evolve to that point. And so when you're looking at something like Bitcoin, what is it? Well, we don't really know. We try to kind of understand it based off of what we know, but we do know it's a technological revolution. And so it's going to be much bigger than we can understand. So when you look at new technologies, you value them differently. So for example, you invest into Uber. What is it? I don't know, some way to get rides. Well, you go into a venture capital round, and that's in a 10-year lockup. Maybe, hopefully, one day it becomes liquid. It goes public. Imagine if Uber was marked to market on a daily basis for that 10-year period. Ooh, San Francisco cab shut it down. The price crashes. Ooh, they're going to move into Austin. Price goes up. Ooh, now New York's moving against it. Price goes down. Imagine watching that happen in real time, but you don't. You allow it to grow for a decade before we get marked to market. So how do you measure a network that's not marked to market on a daily basis? 2 ways. One, you look at the user growth. So we look at Bitcoin through user growth, and look at the hash rate. The Bitcoin miners is going, as Nico said, up and to the right. It's growing fast. We just surpassed the record of all-time highs of wallets holding 1 Bitcoin or more. So we see massive user adoption. So that's how you value. The second way that you value a new technology, other than the US dollar valuation, is you also look at development on the network. Back to the Uber example, they have Uber Eats now, right? And so are they developing on the network? Is the app improving? And so we can look at all the development happening on Bitcoin, and that's massively up and to the right. And so the US dollar valuation is a manipulated valuation that's really a distraction. If we look at the user growth and the development on the network, we can see it's not very volatile, it's advancing very rapidly.
One of the things that I say to people, I tell people, is that Bitcoin is volatile for the same reason that my 2.5-year-old son is volatile, because he's growing like crazy. He's full of just energy and life and all these things. And it would be foolish to avoid Bitcoin for its volatility for the same reason it would be foolish to avoid having children, because they're going to start in a very volatile period for a number of years.
And you could also say that volatility is a good thing because if it wasn't volatile, that means it never changes. So Bitcoin could just stay at zero forever.
Yeah.
How does Bitcoin go from 0 to 10 million or 1 million or 50 million, whatever it's going to go to, without volatility? How does your son grow from 2 years old to be an adult without, like, it doesn't happen. And so it's a good thing.
And like nobody really ever complains about the upward volatility of Bitcoin. I've yet to meet someone. I suppose it's theoretically possible, but okay. So here we go. This is a thing that's gotten touched on a little bit. Actually, I'm going to save that one. Paul, I want to go to you. Bitcoin isn't scalable. Can't process as many payments as Visa.
True.
Yep.
Yeah, Bitcoin is specifically intentionally constrained in the size, the throughput of transactions that can go into each of those 10-minute blocks, because the goal is decentralization. So the goal is to make it sure that as many people as possible can buy a Start9 or set up an Umbrel or fire up an old laptop and can verify the entire blockchain. And so you'll see these new altcoins come out and like, look at our crazy throughput. Well, how do they actually work? You buy a computer that costs like $20,000 with insane amounts of RAM, and you put it in like a cloud server because it's got to be, it's got to be connected to the backbone. You need the absolute most throughput, and I'm sure these Visa servers are pretty beefy. But the cool thing about Bitcoin is that you can build layers. And so I work in Lightning. Lightning is a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin, and so it secures back to the Bitcoin blockchain, uses kind of as a judge and arbiter of disagreements. But as long as you're in agreement with your channel partner, you can send these transactions back and forth with basically infinite scale. So Bitcoin does not scale as big as Visa as far as transactions per second. Lightning on top of Bitcoin vastly outperforms Visa because it's not trying to come to one centralized decision of the state of the world, which is something that Visa is always going to need to do. Lightning is more peer-to-peer, one individual to one individual, and we can send money back and forth as fast as we want.
Let me add to that, because I think it's not really a good comparison. It's not apples to apples. And so you're going to hear this one a lot, and so it's important to understand this. If you've read the book Layered Money, then you might understand this a little bit better. If you haven't, you should go back and read that book. And so gold was money for 5,000 years, but gold is a slow settlement layer, right? It's a base layer. And so in order to speed up those transactions, to add velocity to the money, we had to add a second layer. That was paper gold certificates, IOUs. And then we had checks, and that was a third layer. And then we had a Visa card. That was a fourth layer. So this Visa, to the comparison, is a fourth layer, fifth layer on top of a gold settlement layer. So you're comparing a fifth settlement layer to a base chain, right? So the Bitcoin settlement layer is much faster than gold. Now, if we're comparing layers, the Lightning network is way faster than the Visa network. The Visa network batches transactions just like Lightning does, and it settles it on the main chain. Now, Lightning settles very quickly. First of all, the Lightning transaction is almost instant, and the merchant can receive it right away. If anybody has a store or accepts Visa cards, you know that you typically don't receive that money for several days. For several days. So Visa isn't fast. It takes, 45 seconds at the POS terminal, and it takes me 3 days to get the money in my account. Lightning takes, before I pull my finger off the button, the Lightning transaction's already done. So Bitcoin is way faster than Visa if you compare both the base layer and the second layers.
I want to add some stuff to that as well. It's the most legitimate criticism of Bitcoin there is. So if someone is complaining about scaling, you're justified in having a, put the battle axe down, and it's like it's time to have a real discussion because this person actually has done some thinking about it. Because Bitcoin is a whole bunch of different things. It does a lot of different things. Some aspects of it scale beautifully at the expense of other aspects. So there is, as much as it's nice to posture about it, especially with larger groups of people, there are difficulties ahead. It's not the easiest thing to get Bitcoin to work in the way we all want it to work, and there are ways it just cannot work. Or there are ways in which it cannot continue to work as it has been. So anyone that's been trying to make transactions the last couple of weeks or months has noticed that you just can't get stuff in on the base layer unless you're willing to pay $20, $30 for a transaction. That wasn't the case a year ago when you could pay.
Which is still cheaper than a wire transfer.
Absolutely, but we're talking about what's the trajectory.
I hope transaction fees go to $100 because that will spur innovation on Lightning, the likes of which we've never seen before, because we're going to have the brightest minds in the space trying to figure out that problem.
We do ultimately need transaction fees to be high, of course. But again, everyone wants everything. It's like the volatility complaint. People are like, oh, but it's this. I'm like, okay, well, find me a Bitcoin that also somehow manages to stay exactly pegged to the US dollar. Like, okay, cool. Like, you cannot have everything. So in Bitcoin, we've accepted the fact that if we want the network to be secure and we want people to be able to run nodes like you're talking about, then the trade-off is that block space has to be treated as even more divinely scarce than 21 million, which is a hard thing for a lot of people to understand, and there was a civil war about it at one point. But I mean, the right guys won. Now, as you mentioned, you can run Bitcoin nodes and verify everything on very, very cheap hardware, which is what separates us from every single other crypto, bar none, because they all pile on features at the expense of people being able to actually verify what's going on in the network. And then that means it becomes completely centralized, and then none of the other features matter because they are beholden to the whims of the people that are at the central point of control. So Bitcoin says that's an absolute, we'll keep that. But everything else becomes tertiary, or at least secondary to that, where you have to think, all right, we're going to need to come up with a solution for this. Lightning has been around for some years, and it's come on leaps and bounds, and it's amazing technology, and it's still really impractical for most people to use.
Yeah, and speaking of those, $100 transactions would be really awful for the, like, what I view as like the best Lightning wallets right now, which are self-custodial. To have self-custodial Lightning, you have to open and close channels. So that requires on-chain transactions to get set up. So you're just embarking on your journey to learn this about this new money. And your first thing is a $100 fee just so you can have a channel so you can make like a $2.50 transaction. So that's scary. And I could see us potentially having kind of this sine wave of, Bitcoin is too hard to use. So I'll use a custodian. I'll use Mt. Gox.
And then you get robbed.
And then you get rugged, you get wrecked. And also at the same time, the user experience of directly using Bitcoin gets better. But now Bitcoin gets too expensive to use. So I'll use the wallet of Satoshi. I won't hold, self-custody my own funds. And so, hopefully we can, as developers, keep improving the user experience. But as Bitcoin scales, there's going to be a lot of humps of difficulty to use it well.
And just like normal maturity has lots of bumps along the way. Like these are normal things when you grow anything. You're going to have bumps along the way. Other than this conference, we don't have any bumps today. It's been fantastic. Okay, let's see here. Governments can ban Bitcoin.
I wish they would. Nothing helps Bitcoin more than government antagonism. This is what people need to understand. So we have this beautiful concept of anti-fragility. And what people think that means is that, here's what it means. It means that it thrives in adversarial conditions. It's not just that it can withstand them. And it also means that you can mollycoddle it and actually create weaknesses, which is why I constantly advocate for people to have an adversarial relationship with the state. And this is something I find myself, since becoming a Christian in March 2018, I would say, is when I'd say that happened. Thank you. And thank you to this conference. Last year, me and Thomas Strollite, we got baptized after this conference. And what I remarked on last year was the countercultural nature of Christianity's inception. It wasn't state-sanctioned, right? For hundreds of years, if you were a Christian, you got killed for it. And what that does is it creates something that lasts for 2,000 years. Whereas if the government comes along and says, oh, this thing, that's fine, we like it, and KYC exchanges, like Bitcoin's fine, pay your taxes, here's how we treat it. What you do is you create an incredibly weak version of Bitcoin because people aren't fundamentally people just aren't incentivized to protect it and to use it in a way where they value their own sovereignty. So, for example, people will use regulated financial institutions to store their sovereign money. What have they just done? They've just compromised the sovereignty of what it is they could have had. And then what we need is for them to get their money stolen, which happens quite a lot, thankfully, and then people sometimes learn the lesson. But if governments come along and they make it illegal, what that does is overnight the price drops a ton, right? We lose 80-90% of the value. But whatever, like you weren't leveraged long irresponsibly, were you, right? Okay, so you've all been responsible with your Bitcoin possession. But then how do you have a price discovery mechanism at that point? Assuming they do something like, say, you've got 90 days to sell your Bitcoin, and after that, it's illegal. Yeah, the price tanks. But then after that, we have case studies verifying what I'm saying here. This is not pure theory. When they do it, it makes the price go up. Because you create how much do you think cocaine would cost if it was legal? Is always the example I give. It would be the same price as salt. Mm-hmm. Instead, it costs a fortune because everyone has to do their own verification. There's no stamps on anything. Yeah. If you buy anything illegal, suddenly you're in a position of personal responsibility. What is this thing? Is this the thing I think it really is? Is this guy vouched for? Do I know the people that are selling it? So when it comes to Bitcoin, if Bitcoin's illegal and you want to buy some, you need to be running a node. You need to have a wallet that's connected to it. That wallet needs to not dox you. That wallet needs to only connect to your own node. It hopefully needs to do it through the Tor network. And all of that being the case means you're off-grid at that point. The government have just given you all the incentive to learn how to Bitcoin properly. And what we've learned about people is that if you don't give them that incentive, they tend to not do it. So most people will just use Bitcoin in a way that actually weakens the whole network out of fear. And then I'm saying governments hate Bitcoin. They want to damage it. And the best thing they can do is the poisonous embrace of the state, I call it, where they come along and they sanction it and say, Bitcoin's fine, but you have to use it like this. You have to tell us all of the...
In a POS network.
What's that?
On a POS network. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's so many ways they can just neuter the whole thing, right? And the case study I wanted to mention was Nigeria, where they said, okay, we're just making it illegal. And the price just immediately shot up. And everyone in Nigeria starts learning how to run nodes. And they're like, okay, stop, halt. Okay, here's the new legislation, all right? It's legal. You have to use it this way and this way. Because they immediately learn that if we want to have any control over this thing at all, we can't just immediately draw a line and put every Bitcoiner over the line where they're totally out of our jurisdiction. They can do so much more if they keep us inside. So that's why they will. And this is why I find that I have to have this conversation every time with someone that comes along with what if the government makes it illegal for them? Like, they're not going to do it, and that's actually a bad thing.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to add to what you were saying about Nigeria because it's really fascinating. Nigeria is one of the countries that has one of the highest Bitcoin adoption. Around the same time, their reaction to this was rolling out the e-Naira, which is the Nigerian central bank digital currency. Dismal adoption rate. And the reason is simple. We have incentives on our side. All they have is coercion. And I think the greatest example of this was, I think one of Bitcoin's biggest stress tests, of course, everyone talks about the fork wars, but also...
What were the fork wars?
Fork wars were basically, it was part of the scaling solution. Yep. So it was like they wanted to scale it this way, the other side wanted to scale it this way, but like you said, I think the good guys won at the end. But
now, were the good guys big guys, or were the good guys little guys?
The good guys were the small, the everyday.
David won, not Goliath.
David won, not Goliath. That's what I'm talking
average
about. Everyday
pleb running their Bitcoin node at home. But speaking of Goliath, I think the best example that I give when say, oh, governments are going to ban this. We got attacked by one of the most powerful nation states on the face of the planet, which was China, which is controlled by the CCP. They banned Bitcoin miners within their borders. The hash rate dropped like 60, 70%. I think in less than a year, not only did the hash rate recover, decentralizing in the process, right? It made an all-time high. Yeah. And I never forget the conversation that I had with a buddy of mine who lives in mainland China. I'm like, dude, like they made Bitcoin illegal. Are you worried? And I swear to God, it's crazy that you speak the same language. And with this thick accent, he said, Nico, they've tried this like 6 times, but you can't kill the honey badger. And he said it with such a thick accent, I just started laughing. But I started thinking, I'm like, we speak the same language, and we're thousands of miles away from each other. And you know what the crazy stats is about China? It's that it's estimated that 20% of the hash rate is still located in China. So even with the threat of being locked up in a communist prison, people still want to mine Bitcoin.
And even better, those 20% of miners won't do anything the government says because the government can't have them in their jurisdiction anymore. Yeah. So the Chinese government has cut itself off from being able to strong-arm Bitcoin.
And it looks like a lot of that's coming back now with the situation with Russia running pipelines over for natural gas over to China, having to run them through Kazakhstan, et cetera. It looks like a lot of that mining might actually be coming back now. They'll be getting power again, and so that'll be coming back as well. And so I think about two things. I think first of all, we talk about this a lot. One of the attributes of Bitcoin is this game theory that it employs, and so we've seen game theory play out in real time, and this goes back to like El Salvador. So while let's say Western governments may decide to, cut their nose off to spite their face or whatever, so to speak, you have other nations that won't. And so we saw this week Liechtenstein said, hey, we're going to allow people to start paying in Bitcoin. And so, you can't kill it out completely. And so then it's going to be alive somewhere, and that game theory is going to play out. And the other thing I'd say is that, when they start talking about taking away gun rights in the United States, gun sales go through the roof. When the government tells you that you shouldn't do drugs, it doesn't make you want to do drugs. When they tell you don't have a right to store your wealth in a way we can't steal from you, it sort of makes you want to do that. And they've spent, $3 trillion on the war on drugs, and the war on drugs drugs are a bigger problem. It's the number one cause of death from 18 to 35 today. And that's something that has to be grown, cultivated, packaged, processed, shipped, smuggled, and distributed. How do they stop something totally digital? And of course they don't.
Yeah. All right, I think we got time for one more, depending on how this goes. Governments will create their own crypto coin and force it on people.
All right, real quick, and then I'll pass it on to everybody. Governments are always going to want to do two things. They're always going to want to inflate, and they're always going to want to control the money flows. Yep. They will never let go of those two things, and because they will never let go of those two things, we will always win on incentives, and the only mechanism they have left is coercion. But what Mark was saying is that if one jurisdiction is hostile towards Bitcoin, Bitcoiners are just going to vote not only with their wallet, but vote with their feet as well.
Yep.
I think real quick on that is they already have. It's called the US dollar. There will be no philosophical difference in whatever they bring out, except they will clear up technical debt, which is, there's this annoying element to the dollar, which is called cash, where you can't surveillance or surveil people to the absolute death. They'll clean up that little bug and make it so it's absolute, complete and utter surveillance. Every cent you send will know where you were when you spent it, what it was on, all that stuff. They'll clean that up, but for every other purpose, they already have it. Like, we have Bitcoin and we have, I think Max Kaiser calls it garbage coin when he's on like TV and can't say the S word. So. We have Bitcoin and we have garbage coin. They're going to reinvent garbage coin. It will never be Bitcoin. It's like, there's no difference.
I think one thing along this line, because like there's, how many of you guys have heard the word CBDC? Central bank digital currency. Yes, it should induce that exact response. But central bank digital currency is basically, it's a digital currency where the government can fundamentally decide when and where you can or cannot spend your money. So what that means is, if the government can decide, hey, we don't like the cut of your jib. Okay, we don't want you to spend money at that Thank God for Bitcoin conference.
You've already bought your amount of meat. You can't spend any of this money on a carbon product for the next 14 days.
Yeah, or you actually did buy some, so we're gonna fine you, and we're gonna take the money directly out of your account. So it's literally, it's even better, dystopian to the core. It's insane. Yeah.
Expiry date. Money with an expiry date.
Yes.
Okay. We don't like people saving money. We want people to spend money because our economy is falling apart. So all of your savings, on December 31st, they are going to not be money anymore.
Or you're not saving enough, so we'll give you a positive interest rate, and you're hoarding too much, so we're going to get you with negative. But I want to go back to the point. So if governments are going to want to do this, so there's two things that I think of on that. One, they were both talking about the e-Naira. So in Nigeria, they've been using the Bitcoin, and these central bankers they're incompetent. They think they know what they're doing, they don't. And so they fail to realize things. So they think, we need to get the central bank digital currency because obviously people want digital currencies. And since we haven't created it, then they're going to find these other solutions. We can give them better solutions. They came up with the e-Naira, but they couldn't get people to use it. And they tried the carrot, which is, hey, well, we'll give you discounts on your pedicabs if you use the e-Naira. Well, that didn't work. So then came the stick, which is, well, now we'll limit cash withdrawals from ATMs. But the people in Nigeria said, why would we use that? The reason we left the Naira to go to Bitcoin is because you're debasing the currency. It's now holding value. And the e-Naira is no different. And so they've completely rejected that. And I think that will be the way that will continue to work. And so again, the hubris or the incompetence of these government leaders who think they can enforce that, and what they fail to realize is that money, none of us want money, which seems weird. What we want is the goods and services that money gets us, right? Money is a medium of exchange. And so the reason why it's important to understand it from that level is because we want goods and services. We exchange things in the middle to get those. And so the government in Venezuela wanted you to use their currency, but yet it's littered all over the streets. People don't even pick it up. And so we could exchange, hey, I'll trade you my iPhone for this. Would you take that? Hey, how about if I come and work at your house for a day? Would you take my labor? We, the people, say what money is. We, the people, accept things as a medium of exchange and communicate value. We decide what money is, not the state.
I think another... Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Well, yeah, something very similar has kind of made me optimistic about this particular type of government action, is that they might be just as dumb as I was. Like, I saw Bitcoin, and I was like, well, that's interesting. That seems like it would work if you needed to make payments or whatever, but we don't. We already have a thing to make. And so, like, it took me a lot of touch points to actually learn about, understand Bitcoin. And so I think a lot of governments miss out on the value of a savings technology, so they see Bitcoin as a payments technology. And obviously they have lots of reasons to not want a rival savings technology to exist, but they're not even, I don't think a lot of them are even thinking about how valuable that use case is to us. So like, we are in some sense ahead of the curve because we have seen this need for something and we're going after this thing. And they might try to rival Bitcoin with a CBDC, but they're going to miss the mark because what we're looking for is a savings technology, and they're making just another payments technology pegged to the same down to the right.
I think one aspect, again, to like tailor this somewhat to the present audience. So in China, there's churches that are like, these are government-sponsored churches. Like, the government says, we give our blessing. This is the church that you can give money to. These guys over here are not a church that you can give money to. So what are you supposed to do if you're a Christian in one of those churches where they don't let you give the money? Are you supposed to say, dear God, I'm sorry, they told us we couldn't, so we're not going to tithe? Is that an acceptable Christian? It's not. And so there's, if you have a government, the Chinese government is probably, they're able to, at least in theory, say you're not able to give to these missionaries or give to these, these different things. So what is your responsibility as a Christian? Do it anyway. And again, this is not cavalier, just disrespect of government. It's not. We see this all throughout the scriptures. We see God's people disobeying government when government gets to the point where they try to be God. And so one of the most loving things that you see in Scripture is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who loved Nebuchadnezzar enough to not indulge his delusion that he's God. They loved him so much that they were willing to get into a furnace and die rather than let him live under the delusion that he is God. And so we are really coming up at a point, this happens all throughout church history, all throughout history more broadly, where the path of love and respect looks very different than we're accustomed to it looking. And again, you have governments who are moving beyond, they're moving beyond things that are good, useful, in line with what government was designed to be, what government was designed to be and do. And so, again, part of this is a willingness to say, hey, this is a tool that I have a solemn responsibility to use to further, again, as a Christian, further the kingdom of God in this world. And governments don't have the ability to tell me not to do that. Does that make sense? I just think that's, again, super niche. But again, given who we're talking to, like, these are issues that we have to be thinking through. I spoke with a pastor a number of weeks ago, and I said to him, this church has been saving up money for I mean, I think nearly 10 years. They're avoiding debt. They don't want to go into debt. And so they've been saving up money to be able to buy a building. And I said to him, what's going to happen? You know, you're literally, this is not some crazy hypothetical. Like, you preach the Bible. We're at a point in time in life where you preach the Bible and, you know, you can get debanked very quickly. We're actually going to have Ben, BT Sessions is going to come up here. We have a minute left. And Ben lives in Canada and was part of the Canadian trucker protest. And so he experienced firsthand what happens, what governments can do just to say, we don't like the words that are coming out of your mouth. We don't like the opinions you have. And so we're going to try to do everything we can to stop you. And so I think we have lived in a place where we've been very comfortable and had lots of blessings, and it's been relatively easy to, live. But there comes points in history where you have to make hard decisions and be willing to endure discomfort, if not suffering, in the path of being obedient and actually being respectful and loving. I'm going to give anybody else 30 seconds to finish anything they want to add.
Yeah. Just to kind of, on the theme that you're talking about, no one deserves the godlike power of being able to create money for free.
Yeah.
And all the unintended consequences of what that causes, what are the unintended consequences to the economy, to the political system, and what my response is to that. I refuse to work for money that another man can create for free.
That is such a good quote.
It is
such a good quote, yeah.
It is Bitcoin or slavery. We will win because we have the incentives on our side, and all they have is coercion.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I'm bullish on incentives.
There we go. All right. Thank you, guys. We are